So I directly hand over to Ila for anti-aging interventions. Have they worked, or which lessons are learned?
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. I will talk a little bit about history because obviously rejuvenation research didn't start yesterday, or it is even older than PubMed. So what have been done in those hundreds and thousands of years that we have been exploring this? Have anything worked? What can we learn from this history? So the one big question that we need to ask, what does it mean work? What do we mean by working? What kind of endpoints we want to establish? What standards we judge success or failure? There are no consensus about it. Every man is for himself, or every woman is for herself. No standards. Everybody judges success about whatever measures he wants. And we do need some kind of consensus. But even in the absence of such consensus, we can say, intuitively that if we ask ourselves, do our society live much longer and healthier because of aging research? Probably no. Have we reversed aging? Probably no. So nothing have worked so far by those standards. If we ask ourselves, did those studies contribute to the development of medicine? Did they help at least some people live longer and healthy? Absolutely. And I will give a few examples. And this is actually a useful point for advocacy when decision makers ask us, where's our potato chips? What do we get for our money? You may probably not promise them rejuvenation or radical life extension, but you can definitely promise them some development of medicine, some improvement of healthcare. I summarize some of the examples I summarized some of the examples in a paper I published in Rejuvenation Research a few years back, the unexpected outcomes of anti-aging rejuvenation life extension studies and origin of modern therapies. And of course, you can find all this information also in my books, History of Life Extensionism and Longevity Promotion, that you can free download at longevityhistory.com. So just some of the examples from history that profoundly anti-aging rejuvenation studies actually produced tangible benefits for the development of medicine. So we start with the obvious: alchemy, philosopher's stone, transmutation. None of this was achieved, but definitely it was very helpful for the development of science, of medicine. If you just look at the technical terms in chemistry, many of them came from alchemy. For example, alcohol, it's an Arabic word, alcohol, coming from the Muslim alchemy about 1,500 years ago. In Europe, also the development of medical alchemy in particular, or so-called iatrochemistry, contributed much to the use of elements in medicine. For example, Paracelsus, he was one of the early pioneers of the idea of dose response. As you know, the dose makes the poison. It's his saying. So that's the basis of dose response idea. Metchnikoff, the actual founder of the gerontology field, he coined the term gerontology back in 1903, also explicitly did rejuvenation research, wanting to intervene into aging, extend healthy life to 150. Didn't succeed, but he did create the science of gerontology. He did create the rationale for detoxifying intestines by acidified milk product, the so-called probiotic diets. We can argue now, does it work or not, and in which people it works, but it's still one of the actual tangible outcomes from this research. Charles Edouard Brown-Séquard, a French rejuvenator from the end of the 19th century, also injected himself with dog and guinea pig testicle extracts, and reported some rejuvenation effects. He died 5 years later. Didn't succeed, not in rejuvenation, but he did found the science of hormone replacement therapy. He was probably one of the first users of therapeutic endocrinology. And later this tradition continued by some other rejuvenators, such as Eugen Steinach, who was also one of the pioneers of sex hormone research. Thanks to him, we know a lot what sex hormones actually do. He was also a contributor to the sex change operations. So once again, all this was born from rejuvenation research. Another example is Serge Voronov. It is, fashionable, to despise Voronov, what kind of experiments he did, monkey gland affair, what kind of idea to transplant the slices of monkey testicles, actually ape testicles, to humans. But actually, it was also one of the earliest examples of xenotransplantation. So we should be actually thankful to him as one of the pioneers of this scientific direction. And yet another example is Alexis Carrel. Also, many people dislike him for his political views, but at least in science, he was definitely a pioneer, especially in cell culture research. Also a developer of probably one of the first working perfusion apparatuses. There were several talks today about the rejuvenation effect of plasma. Actually, he did these experiments exactly 100 years ago. In 1921, he published his results about the rejuvenation effects of young versus old blood serum, that's blood plasma without fibrinogens. And actually, many issues that are discussed now were raised by him. For example, does the rejuvenation effects is rejuvenating effects produced by some use promoting substances in the young plasma, or is the loss of rejuvenating effects due to accumulation of toxins in the old plasma? And he decides for the conclusion that it is due to the accumulation of toxic products in the old plasma. Exactly 100 years ago, he did those experiments on fibroblast cultures. Definitely a pioneer. Definitely this came out of explicit rejuvenation research. Another example that probably not many people know because they didn't read my books is Auguste Lumière. Brothers Lumière, Auguste and Louis Lumière, who are credited for the invention of cinematography, but not many people know that after that, Auguste Lumière dedicated the last 50 years of his life to medical research, in particular rejuvenation research, and actually developed quite a few interesting approaches. For example, approaches to colloid stabilization, basically used emulsifiers to stabilize blood colloids. Also to break down some of the colloids in the blood, the so-called colloideclasia, that what we now called breaking down the protein aggregates and things like that. Also used such things as granulotherapy, ontrotherapy, basically using small carbon particles, also for rejuvenation. That could be seen as a foreshadowing of some of the nanomedicine applications we're now trying. Once again, born of rejuvenation research. Another interesting figure. Now we go to Russia. Quite a few pioneers were from there. One of the first examples of successful cryopreservation was done by Porfiry Bakhmetyev at the end of the 19th century, a Russian physicist that worked in Bulgaria. He actually succeeded to freeze and thaw bats, and it could be seen as one of the foreshadowing of cryopreservation, of cryobiology in general. And the purpose of his research was explicit to, as he said in one of his articles, to leave a recipe to live to the 21st century with the explicit aim of life extension. Did he succeed? No, but he did contribute a lot to science. Another example is blood transfusion for rejuvenation by Alexander Bogdanov. Once again, transfusing blood plasma is definitely not a new idea. He did this exactly 100 years ago. Also built probably the first, not probably, the first institute for blood transfusion in Moscow in 1926. Specifically for the purpose of rejuvenation. Also did some foreshadowing of cybernetics with his general organizational science. Very interesting figure. He himself died from a blood transfusion, from a self-experiment, because of apparently some mismatch in blood types. By today's measures, it was a bit of failure. You know, he died in his own experiment. So we should just ban all these kinds of experiments. But it was actually one of the pioneering attempts in blood transfusion in rejuvenation research. And the two last examples is adjuvant immunotherapy done by Alexander Bogomolets, the founder of the Ukrainian School of Gerontology, probably the first most powerful gerontology school in the world, out of which was born the Kiev Institute of Gerontology. And he used cytotoxic serums. Actually, already Mechnikov experimented with the cytotoxic serums, with serums that could stimulate the tissues in small doses. Once again, there were excellent results reported at first, then it was forgotten, not so much because of some contraindications, but simply because he died, and there were nobody to continue after him. But at least he was one of the pioneers of systemic immunotherapy or adjuvant immunotherapy. And the last example, Paul Nihans, also the people like to call him a charlatan, but if you look at history, this was probably one of the first recorded examples of cell therapy. He started his experiments in the 1930s. Also, cell therapy is not something new. Almost 100 years it is done. And also reported some rejuvenating effects with animal cells, probably most often from young sheep, but also human embryonic cell therapy. Some of the famous patients were the Pope Pius XI, also Somerset Maugham, many people, Konrad Adenauer, people like that. Once again, did it work? At least he started the cell therapy. He started this field. About the Pope, it is actually an interesting story. You know, Catholic Church prohibits the use of embryonic stem cells, but we don't know what kind of therapy the Pope was given himself. We know that he was given a therapy, but we don't know what kind of therapy was given. So you see, when it comes to actual life extension, religious is not so much of a consideration. So these are my examples. So we see that a lot of actual good science was born out of seemingly crazy rejuvenation attempts for life extension studies. Did they achieve radical life extension? No. Did they contribute to science? Yes. What can we learn from those examples? Some common features of all those studies is they all looked at the organism as a whole, not at any particular cell or a piece of a cell or a molecule. They tried to look at the organism as a whole. They watched the organism for long term, so they were holistic by their nature. Actually, you cannot develop therapy in aging if you are not holistic, because aging is concerns the entire body, the entire human development, so you have to be holistic to intervene. So they all were holistic. They all employed systemic approaches. That's why they were able to develop some actual therapies for an actual human being. They look at the homeostasis, what they called balance of the entire organism. Also, they were in the ideology, they were very proactive. You know, the purpose wasn't to sit in the lab and write papers. They went directly after therapies. Their purpose was to develop therapies and apply them in humans as soon as possible. Often they went from animal studies to human studies in just a few years, 3 to 5 years. You know, many of them would probably go to jail if they tried anything like that now. At least they would make all the IRBs crazy, but that was their goal. They want to develop therapies, so they did it, and of course they were less regulated for good and for bad, which was also giving them some freedom of action. So these are some of the lessons. What can we use of them? I don't know, but probably we should also be more therapy driven, more proactive. And once again, I come back to the first point. How do we judge success? What are the actual general endpoints that we want to achieve? And this way we can also see if we succeeded or failed. There are now many other directions that I pursued. Once again, let us establish what is it that we want to measure. And by the way, we are now putting together a special research topic in Frontiers in Genetics exactly about this, clinical evaluation criteria for aging and age-related multimorbidity, what are the criteria that we want to use to judge our success and failure? Because that is a very open question. How do we measure aging, and how do we measure the success in reversing aging? How do we even define aging? There are not many agreed definitions. Is it a disease, a syndrome, risk factors, underlying cause? Lots of semantics, lots of words flying around without specific measurable definitions. So I hope that we can also learn from history the two things, that first, all these efforts are worthwhile. Even if we don't succeed in treating aging or living twice as long as we live now, we will certainly be able to contribute to science. And second, in order to judge success, we need some criteria that we have to develop, probably by some consensus process. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.